Everybody, happy selling your souls to the Saudis Day, and welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's deputy political editor, Ben Glaze. Morning, Ben.
Good morning, Susie.
Now, this is the People's Paper Review, so those of you watching live, please get into the comments, ask us your questions. The best ones do get a news agenda mug. There has not been a winner recently, so we got one. We need to give it away. For those of you listening on the podcast, you can't comment, but you can just shout at the car stereo or something. Now, so what have we got today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on the Prime Minister's dash for oil as he begs murderous Saudi despot Mohammed bin Salman to turn on the fuel pumps, while sanctions against Russia have become the act of self-harm that everyone frankly knew they would inevitably be. Now, of course, Ben, the reason for taking that pain for all of us at the pumps and in our homes was supposed to be to punish Vladimir Putin for invading Ukraine. Had the Prime Minister stayed at home and told us that he was, perhaps freezing fuel duty, taking a couple of pennies off at the pump, something like that, we might have worn it for that reason, perhaps, and been able to stand it a bit easier, politically at least. But running off to beg for oil from some of the worst people in the world is something absolutely no one seems able to stomach apart from Boris. So why is he doing this instead of that?
The government believes that whatever Rishi Sunak could do at the spring statement a week today, sort of mini budget that comes around once a year, two major financial statements each year, the budget and the spring statement. The government believes that whatever the Chancellor does next week can be nothing in comparison to putting more oil on the world market. Now, I was driving on the weekend down to the coast and we went to about 4 or 5 petrol stations, and it was £1.67 a litre on average for unleaded. That is huge. That is a big cost to families each time they fill up their tank. Now, because the price of oil goes up generally at times of war, because oil does not like international prices, the prices have gone up on the world market already. And because Russia produces oil, that's even worse because there are sanctions against Russia. So Saudi, long-term British ally, let's not forget, big producer of oil, and they are producing under capacity at the moment. There's some suggestion it might be about 2 million barrels a day extra they could produce if they wanted to. So Boris Johnson has flown out last night to first Abu Dhabi, and then he flies on to Riyadh, the Saudi capital, this afternoon, basically to beg Gulf leaders to pump more oil. Now, everyone knows about Saudi's human rights abuses. Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, he is alleged to have ordered the murder and dismembering of journalists who didn't like Jamal Khashoggi. And he also, last weekend, ordered the executions of 81 people. These are human rights abuses. Yeah. And yet, Boris Johnson is off to beg for more oil. The Prime Minister basically is saying, this is realpolitik. We have to deal with situations as they are, not as we would wish them to be. So hold your nose and go out there and ask.
Well, those 81, it's worth saying, many of them were arrested, held, tried and executed in complete secrecy. International human rights organisations don't even know what they were accused of in many cases. Now, James says there, Comrade Johnson's on an ego trip when he's dealing with corrupt governments such as his own. There may be some corruption at the heart of our government, James. I don't know. If I did, it would be in the newspaper, mate. But it's not as bad as the Saudis, whatever it is that our guys might be doing wrong. Now, we get most of our oil and gas, anyway, Ben, from Norway and the United States. Many, 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 many more times than we get from Russia or Saudi Arabia. So you'd think we should be able to ride out the dips and perhaps ask for more from friendlier nations. Why can't we just ask Norway to send us a bit extra? Can they're nicer people?
Right. Britain, the North Sea has been very good to both the United Kingdom and to Norway. We're running down our allocations, if you like, on those North Sea oil fields, but Norway is still pumping lots. If we don't rely on Russia for gas and oil. About 4% of UK gas comes from Russia, in fact. But the problem is we buy it on the world market. So even though we're not getting it from there, and there's now an export ban essentially against Russian oil and gas, although technically it can come here with a copy of Russian ships. It's a nuance to that, but because we buy it on the world market, it's more expensive. So, we all know that we're doing the right thing as a country by trying to cut Russia off financially, by not buying its oil and gas. But literally, you can see the price of this each day when, if you've got a smart meter, you see how much you're spending on your gas. When you go to fill up your car, you can see how much it's costing. It's there literally in black and white on the petrol station forecourt.
Yeah, we're like at my local petrol station overnight. Yeah,
I mean, this is what happens. We are paying the price of the war in Ukraine. And thank God we're not paying it in the same price as some of the poor people in the Ukraine. But we are paying it each time we fill up. It's, when we go to our wallet, that is where this war is hitting us.
The thing is, though, Ben, that argument that you just made about buying the Norwegian oil on the world market, surely if Saudi Arabia increases production, they're going to put that out in the world market where the best prices are. It may bring prices down on the world market, but it's not coming direct to us at a favourable price. Where, surely we can go to Norway and say, look, we'll buy bulk, wholesale from you, send us some tankers and we'll pay this rate or whatever. But then we can't, we want to pay less than the world market price, and these people are oil barons, all of them. They're going to negotiate quite hard for the best price, aren't they?
Boris sees it that he's negotiating on behalf of the West, asking Saudi to pump more oil. You're quite correct that if the Saudis agree to do that, and it's by no means guaranteed that they will, but if they did, then others benefit. It won't just be the UK that would benefit from their prices. Now, it has to be said as well that because of the laws of supply and demand, if Saudi agrees to pump more oil, that will bring the price of a barrel of Brent crude, which is the benchmark on international oil markets, it will bring it down. So even though they'll be selling more of it, the cost comes down per unit, and therefore the Saudis might end up losing money theoretically. But what that also does is, because it brings the price down, that hammers Russia, because it's still selling its oil. It's basically going to sell discounted oil to India this morning. But if there is more supply and the price comes down, it comes down for every producing country. So Russia will be able to make less money and therefore have less money to plow into its military to attack the Ukraine if the Saudis agree to do this. And we should remember that for all, Britain doesn't like the human rights abuses that go on in Saudi. We are a long-term partner, security partner in Saudi. We sell them arms, we sell them warplanes. Lots of British jobs rely on making RAF typhoons in Lancashire, which we then flog to the Saudis. Hawk jets previously, this goes back decades. The Al Yamama deal with British Aerospace back in the early 80s. We are partners with the Saudis. We might not like it, but all of us have got some mates we don't like some of their character traits, I'm sure, but you get on with them.
I don't think it's a character trait, but it's a habit of murdering journalists. We have sent them one of our worst journalists overnight, so who knows what will happen. Now, Nick says the Saudis would expect concessions to increase oil production, but what's his price? And this is the point, Ben, isn't it? So other journalists may remember what happened to Jamal Khashoggi back in the Saudi embassy in 2018 in Istanbul, but not a lot seem to remember that there are sanctions. There are actually imposed after this murder in 2018. Mohammed bin Salman himself isn't sanctioned, but 20 people closest to him, some of his top aides who were involved in that murder, are sanctioned to this day. So what are the chances, as Nick suggested there, that they will still be sanctioned by the end of today? Is that going to be the price that bin Salman asks for turning on the taps?
He might, and frankly, he'd be well within his rights to do this. It's a negotiation. If we want something, we have to give something in return. So he might very well ask for that, and then it's up to the Prime Minister how much he wants this extra oil on the market, whether or not he agrees to that. Obviously, he can only speak for Britain in terms of sanctions. He can't speak for any other country. But there's also, for Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, who's essentially been a pariah on the international stage since the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, this is his way back, potentially, if you like. he could see this as redemption globally, because if he is seen to be helping the West by pumping this extra oil and therefore doing damage to the West's enemy, Russia, at this time, then he's back on side, if you like. And for all that Boris Johnson will raise human rights abuses, very briefly, probably in their bilateral talks this afternoon, because he has to, because if he doesn't, we will say to foreign spokesman, they said, did he raise it? And if they say no, you say, well, why not? He will bring it up, but it's a formality. He might not specifically bring up the killing of Khashoggi. It's more likely to be, oh, and by the way, that United Kingdom and other allies, we don't approve of the death penalty, but I've said it now, let's talk about the oil. That could be what happened.
Yeah. Now, bear in mind, of course, that the US has got much tougher sanctions against Saudi Arabia than us, because Jamal was one of their journalists. And Joe Biden and Mohammed bin Salman are very much definitely on non-speakers. So it may possibly be that Boris is going there as kind of a proxy to speak a bit on Biden's behalf. I'm sure they'll have had a phone call before he went. And whether Khashoggi wants to help something that is ultimately led by the US, who knows? Now, Better for Britain says, better the devil you know than the devil you don't. There is that, but devil is still the devil, I suppose. But I wonder, can I just answer, Ben, you may know this, working in the lobby, are there any journalists going to Saudi Arabia today with the Prime Minister?
This is a bit sort of inside baseball, but yeah, there is a pool of journalists, which is to say he's not taking a representative from each newspaper and broadcaster. There's a very small group, so there's a couple of a broadcast journalist who is Laura Kingsburg, who's the editor, cameraman, producer for her. There's a stills photographer and a videographer for Wire and a words writer for Wire. So there's probably about half a dozen journalists in total on that trip. Internally, you won't be surprised to know that there's a bit of discussion and debate with Number 10 about whether or not that should happen.
No, well, exactly. I think as a journalist, I'd be a bit wary about going to Saudi Arabia, certainly a bit wary about drinking the tea or going into any embassies. I hope they are sticking close to the Prime Minister's security detail if they're there. Now, Mike says, if we are paying inflated prices on the world market, surely that means that UK producers are making inflated profits in the same market. And taxing some of that inflated UK profit could help consumers. We're talking about a windfall tax here, Ben. There are plenty of people making a lot of cash out of the North Sea, 14 million barrels a day, I think it is, that we're pumping out, and those are companies like BP, Total, Shell, stuff like that, and they are making enormous profits post-pandemic anyway, even more now, and just about everybody in the country would be happy with a windfall tax, apart perhaps from shareholders in some of those firms, and Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, who don't want to do it. Surely a windfall tax is more politically acceptable to the Tories than begging bin Salman for help.
Well, apparently not. Labour has obviously, and others have been calling for a windfall tax on the oil and gas producers in the North Sea for the past few months, saying it would generate billions. Obviously, it depends what level you set it out, but conservatively, it would generate billions. And you could use that money to alleviate some of the hit that's coming to British families next month when our gas and fuel bills go up. Now, the argument the government makes is that the oil and gas producers already pay an awful lot of tax, and because of the way it is taxed, it is more than other companies. It's not simple corporation tax, for example, so that they do already pay a lot. But of course, when the price goes up, they make more money. It's as simple as that. And it does look bad when they're making such huge profits, and ordinary British families are getting fuel bills going up by roughly £1,000 in a couple of weeks. It is a very bad look for those companies.
And every homeowner as well has just had their council tax bill through, which has increases on top of that as well. So it's all coming at the same time.
That's right. And we've got the national insurance rise coming as well in April. It's a triple whammy, if not more. Plus, you've got ongoing inflation in food and other areas. Inflation of about 5.5% at the moment. The Prime Minister actually had in representatives from the oil and gas industry into Downing Street on Monday morning, where he was talking to them about what more they can do to increase production. There are, of course, a lot of licenses there are licenses that may be granted, new licenses in the North Sea to encourage production. But the oil and gas industry wants not just this windfall tax that's proposed by opposition parties, they want that not to go ahead. It's quite possible that they were in Downing Street asking for tax breaks to go and prospect for more oil or to exploit those fields that we know still exist.
Yeah. Now, as Julie says there, why is France able to put a cap on their energy price increases? We're able to as well, Julie. It's just they have and we haven't, because Emmanuel Macron is so dangerously socialist. Now, as Keir Starmer says, going cap in hand from dictator to dictator is not an energy strategy. But as our colleague Jason Beattie points out on the bottom of pages 8 and 9, Ben, there are other cleaner, greener, some of them quicker ways to fill our energy gaps. For example, it says here at the bottom of the page, there are 649 onshore wind farms with planning permission ready to go ahead, but they haven't been developed yet. So why, Ben, are we not building those right now? Why isn't the Prime Minister, instead of meeting oil suppliers, meeting the people with the planning permission to build those wind farms and saying, what do you need, chaps? Here's some steel, here are some screws, get going.
Just quickly back on that price cap, I take the commenter's point that France has imposed a price cap. Technically, Britain does have a price cap as well. There is the energy price cap, which limits your bill rise to just 54% this April.
Just
in
massive.
France, the rise is, I think it's in single figures. The reason being that EDF is state-owned, the company in France, so that's why the French government can do it much more. Much lower rise than we could. I mean, we could do that as well if we wanted to have a price cap, but the problem is every company would go bust then because they have to buy their fuel on the wholesale market, and the prices that we just discussed have gone up so massively. Onshore wind farms, 2010 to 2015 was a Conservative Lib Dem coalition, and there was expansion in wind power. Conservative MPs hated it onshore. Doesn't mind if it's offshore because, you know, we can see it 20 miles off the British coast rather. Onshore wind farms are much more controversial, particularly because they tend to take place in windy rural areas where the Conservatives are more likely to hold the constituencies. In 2015, when it was a Conservative majority of 16, after that shock general election victory, an outright majority, it was a moratorium imposed on it. So licenses do this, but they're not being built. They could go ahead and do that. Boris Johnson, you know, he's got a very fragile relationship with his backbenchers at the moment. Remember, you know, we stopped talking about party days, but that's been rumbling along in the background. There are still letters of no confidence sitting with the chairman of the 1922 Backbench Conservative Committee, and if you get 54 of those, there's a vote of confidence in the Prime Minister. So he doesn't want to frighten the backbench horses. Onshore wind, he might personally agree with it. We know, you know, he's an environmentalist. His father's an environmentalist. His wife is an environmentalist. It's a tricky area for Conservative MPs.
He's an environmentalist with a personal population increase rate of 6 to 1, I think, at the moment, or is it 7 to 1? So I don't hold with that argument. He's an environmentalist, I'm afraid. Says environmental things, doesn't tie a knot in it, which perhaps he should do. Now, Paul says, why prices go up so quick at the pumps when they have stock at the oil price, but when oil prices go down, it takes weeks to take effect? It does take a long time, Paul, for the oil to come up out of the ground, go through a refinery, get in a tanker, and come here. And it's been traded on the markets throughout. So, although there is probably a chunk of, you know, exploitation and opportunism in those petrol prices, when the local petrol station, if it's independent, for example, is buying it from a dealer, those prices are just built in for weeks, unfortunately. And then there's the fact that once it goes up and people keep paying it, then it sort of does stay up for a bit, doesn't it? Now, Brian says, what about the Sue Gray report? Yeah, that's still sitting there. I think we're at the point now where if Boris Johnson got a fixed penalty notice tomorrow, no one would notice. It would make a nib in the paper because Kyiv. Now, Thomas says, COVID war fuel. What next? Anything to control the world. We soon will be taxed for the air we breathe. Grow up. Let us live with hope for our young ones. All right, Thomas. I think the Beatles said something similar a long time ago. It hasn't worked out yet. Now, there's also some stuff in there about how home insulation would be one of the cheapest ways to bring down fuel prices. If your home is uninsulated, it's worth a little bit of your money to try and do that better. If the government doesn't want to help you, there are some loans and grants and so on available. So look into that if you're worried about your fuel prices. There are lots of helps and guides online to help you do that. Now, keep asking us your questions. What do you think about Boris Johnson going off to make a deal in the desert? Are you concerned about it? Do you not care? Do you think it's a practical thing to do? Let us know. But now on to some domestic news, which is something you might not hear much of in the next few days. While the world is quite rightly watching doctors and nurses operating in basements in the Ukrainian war zone and feeling bad for them, back at home, our own medical service is struggling in different ways for different reasons. Now, page 17 has got a story about how a third of GPs are planning to quit in the next 5 years because of stress and overwork. Now, people are going to, from what I've just said, Ben, are going to say, well, they're not quite as stressed as doctors in Kyiv, are they? But take us through this. Are we going to have, a lot of these are going to be people who are retiring, and perhaps retiring early. So are we going to have enough new GPs coming through the system, Ben, to replace them in the next 5 years?
Well, according to this report, no. Because there's about a third, 32% of existing GPs plan to retire by 2027. And it must be said that plan to retire doesn't mean they will retire, and it doesn't mean they're actually hitting retirement age, because as you said, early retirement is a possibility for family doctors, and they do have quite good pensions to fall back on. You know, it's a well-paid job. But the replacement, the turnover, it will be 14,000 short by 2027, according to this study by the Royal College of General Practitioners, or sort of the trade union organisation, if you like, for GPs. Now, they say that more needs to be done to get GPs to go into, to get doctors to go into general practice. There's also an issue, I suspect, around it's not a 9 to 5 Monday to Friday job. So some people going into the profession don't want to work 5 days a week. There is that, and a mixture of sort of part-time work and locum work, which is, it's convenient if you want to do a few days here, a few days there. It's not great for patients if you want to be able to see the same doctor or the same surgery each time you go. And it is more disruptive, if you like, to the service and to the NHS. But the argument's obviously put more money in, make it better conditions, they want to stay longer. So there is that, but the net loss of 14,000 that's estimated, that will have a huge impact on communities and on families, who, especially with general practice being primary care, that's where, when you've got cough, cold, whatever, that's where you go. Unless, of course, it's a symptom of COVID, you can't go there now, you're not allowed in.
No, exactly. So that story in today's paper, people, it's worth going out and buying the paper, cutting that particular page lead out, sticking it up in your fridge somewhere and waiting for it to go yellow, because in exactly 5 years' time, when the government of the day turns around and goes, oh no, we've run out of GPs, who knew? This will be why. And it'll be because someone's ignored it and failed to perhaps subsidise or encourage bring in new GP recruits right now when they've been told that they need it. Now, Anne-Marie says, good morning, Anne-Marie. The Conservatives have deliberately underfunded our NHS in aim of full privatisation. They'll only get involved when it's fully privatised, and they and their capitalist mates and donors will be making mega bucks at the expense of lives. Let's hope not, Anne-Marie. I think you're probably not a million miles out, but let's hope that the voters, and the fact that British voters, regardless of how they vote, Tory, Labour and otherwise, all generally quite like the NHS and want it to be better funded. Julie says, population increase is putting too much pressure. People need to wake up and shout, the NHS is going to collapse. Try getting medical help is a joke. Right now, yes and no, it is and it isn't. I've got to have a medication review for my prescription, and rather than going to see the doctor, he's going to ring me about it, which is fine. It's just a regular prescription. You ring me, say, is that all right? And I go, yeah, it's fine. And there we go. I don't need to go and see the doctor for that. So there are some things we can do better, perhaps, as a result of the pandemic. Do more Zoom appointments for the right things that can be done on Zoom. Mike says, does Boris's promised 6,000 new GPs include replacing the ones leaving, or will it turn into 6,000 more than we would have had? Well, because we're still 14,000 down, Mike, according to Ben. So it's not going to touch the sides. What a happy, jolly news agenda this has turned into. But we do have some good news in the world, and here it is. Now, just because Ben was on today and he loves a shaggy dog story, we've picked a special one just for him. So after the pandemic, many of us are struggling to make ends meet, as we've discussed, perhaps looking for work or a change of career, something where you can de-stress, earn a reasonable wage and maybe have more quality of life, that sort of thing. So here's a role that's being advertised that might suit you. A family is seeking someone to look, Mary Poppins, look at that. They're seeking someone to look after their 18-month-old French bulldog and do a bit of housework. This will mean getting paid nearly £462 a week, nearly £2,000 a month before tax, for just, wait for it, Ben, 21 hours work a week. Duties will include sleeping over while the family are away, making sure the water bowl's filled up, and a spot of light cleaning in what is only a 2-bed flat. Now, Ben, there are days when I wonder, whether getting paid peanuts to take non-stop abuse on social media is really worth it. And this is one of them, because would the ease and hours of this job perhaps persuade even you that a dog could become your best friend?
No, I'd want considerably more than £460 a week to look after the dog. I've got to say, right, I mean, the dog's brilliant. It's going to have a great life, isn't it? These people in Greenwich who've put this advert up on the website it's advertised on is Polo and Tweed, right? It's not Fish for Jobs or something. I mean, I think the fact that it's advertised on Polo and Tweed tells you the sort of people we're dealing with here. They've clearly got more money than sense. Greenwich is a sort of, it's got, how to phrase it. It's sort of some of the people who live in Greenwich do have more money than sense. They're quite pretentious.
Got a yummy mummy vibe, Greenwich. Yeah. But I used to live in Greenwich and I lived down the rough end and it was fine, it's meaty.
So this French bulldog is going to be one of the most pampered pooches in the United Kingdom. You have to wonder as well, why has this family bought the dog in the first place if they want someone else to look after it? I mean, they're literally only going to walk it on a Sunday afternoon and spend the rest of the time. And also, the bits that are quoted, right, in this piece, doesn't mention the bit that I think you might have to do quite a lot of, right? It says about giving it the rest days. It doesn't say about rest days, but it's probably feeding rest days, isn't it? And changing its water bowl and things like that. Quite a lot of this is going to be collecting pictures, isn't it? Let's face it. Especially wandering around Greenwich, right? It's a nice area, Greenwich. It's perfectly lovely. You're going to be wanting to do a lot of dog walking. But £462 a week for this, no thanks. Plus, you'd have to, if you're sleeping over, you'd have to deal with the people who are putting this advert up. And I suspect they've got a certain way of behaving.
Yeah, I think £2,000 a month nearly would suit quite a lot of people for a nice, easy job. You can do it in something else. Anne-Marie says, I'd love that job. Thank you, Anne-Marie. So would I. Not a French bulldog. I think I'd like a proper dog. But, it would do me. I'd happily manage that. And anyway, Ben, a lot of your objections about how you're going to be picking up poo and what's the point in doing it if you're only going to have someone else look after it applies to just about everybody who's got a nanny, au pair, too many children, or sends their children to private school. Maybe they should all be spayed. Who knows? Thank you for joining us, Ben. I don't think we've got any more comments to wrap up on. Thank you for taking part, everybody. The news agendas will be available on Friday as a podcast if you didn't catch all of it, and you can catch up on it again. And there will also be on the podcast this week an audio version of the Fleet Street Fox columns if you want to, listen to them rather than actually have to sit down and read them. Thank you for taking part, everybody. Thanks, Ben. See you all again next Monday for another edition of the news agenda. Bye-bye.